Teaching your autistic child to advocate for themselves can feel impossible sometimes, but it doesn't have to be. In this episode, we're diving into the challenges of self-advocacy and why it's important for autistic kids to learn how to express their needs and set boundaries. We'll explore the common struggles autistic kids face when trying to speak up, like communication barriers and anxiety, and talk about ways you can support them in finding their voice. If you've ever wondered how to empower your child to ask for what they need, this episode's for you. But before we get started, don't forget to hit that notification bell, like, share, and subscribe. Let's get started. Hey, Embracers.
Welcome back.
Yeah, advocacy, self-advocacy. I feel like we're always talking about parental advocacy, but this is like a little bit different kind of advocacy.
Well, it's because, most of the time we are so like proactive in like kind of like the fight for our kids. Sometimes we forget like, well, they also have to fight too, because otherwise like parents are taking care of everything and the child never learns these skills. And then all sorts of things happen, which we'll dive into.
Yeah.
It's definitely a key skill that has to be addressed at some point.
And I want to preface this by saying that, of course, this is highly dependent upon your specific child's needs and ability to communicate. So depending on where your child is at, they may or may not be able to advocate for themselves. There's some kids who absolutely cannot. And so this is not necessarily for those kiddos. This is more for kids who may have some ability, even if it's not full-fledged ability, even if they're nonverbal, they might still be able to have some version of advocacy. But, we are fully aware and we see you, we hear you for those parents out there where this might not be within the realm of possibility. And we definitely don't want to minimize that. But with that said, we do want to help people who we feel like we do have some experience with that we can kind of provide some insight to as well. So we're going to talk more to those parents today. And that is really, again, verbal or nonverbal for the kiddos who might be able to advocate on some level. For us, we have two kiddos that right now they used to be considered level 2 and 3. They are fluctuating now between level 2 and 1. And so we have very different needs per our children. Like each child has different types of advocacy skill deficiencies, or I would say challenges. And so it looks different for each of them, but they both definitely struggle in, I would say, ways that could cause them to kind of be victims in a sense, like could cause them to get into some significant trouble.
Well, I would say they definitely have different challenges that come to play with kind of like self-advocacy. So like our middle daughter, for example, she's, I would say, very reserved or kind of like I don't know if like closed off is like the right like word for it.
She's quiet. She's like
Right.
I don't know, like she's really into her own world still.
Right. So like we even had the challenge with her kind of advocating against like her sister who's a little bit more, call it what, outgoing,
assertive,
leadership, if you will. So the older one definitely kind of like takes the leadership role, but sometimes we want to make sure like she's not crossing the boundary where like she's like using her younger sister as basically like a prop to like play with. So like, and we've been working a lot as far as like the middle daughter kind of standing up and saying like, oh no, I don't want to do that, because otherwise she would just kind of get like dragged around the house doing different activities and playing different things that she might not want to or enjoy doing with her older sister. So that's been like one of the areas that we've been focusing on with the middle one. But yeah, they definitely have different challenges when it comes to advocacy.
Yeah. So the first thing that we want to do is define self-advocacy. So self-advocacy, when we're talking about it in this episode, we're referring to our kids' ability to communicate their needs. That doesn't have to be verbal. So just communicate their needs in any way, shape, or form. Being able to set boundaries. So if they are in some sort of like high risk situation or something like that, or something that they're uncomfortable with, that they're capable and able to set those boundaries to kind of like protect themselves. And also being able to ask for support when needed or ask for help. Those are like the three main components for self-advocacy that we'll be talking about. And those are the ones that we see our kids kind of struggle with. And we feel like it's really important to talk about it because self-advocacy is part of helping your child build their independence. It's part of helping reduce anxiety and also like build that resilience. So for us, our goal is not really like perfection. We're not really looking for them to be excellent self advocates and be out there like us starting a podcast and all this stuff. We're really just trying to help our kids get to the point where they feel heard, they feel valued, and they're able to get the solution to their problems rather than just kind of suffering in silence.
And I would say even before we get to like being able to like get like to a resolution to solve the problem, like they first have to realize like they need either if they need assistance in order to advocate for it, or recognizing like, okay, I might not be able to do this by myself, and therefore they have to kind of speak up for what they need. So like I'm thinking of like our middle daughter, for example. She will get a broom if she wants something on the counter. She'll get a broom. She'll kind of like walk over and kind of like scoop it off, or she'll drag chairs over. She'll kind of like climb up and get what she needs. But it never seems to kind of cross her mind like, oh, I can just ask like mom or dad, oh, can you reach this? So it's like, I mean, very
Yeah.
independent in a sense, but kind of borderline like not necessarily safe or good at the same time. Because there's also been
Yeah.
times like where she tries to go and get like scissors or something, and might be trying to do something quickly, and we're kind of like, no, no, like make sure like sitting down when you have like scissors so you don't like fall or something. So that's like one area where if we're able to try and break that barrier, that would be a huge step.
Yeah. Or she'll go and get like those big like butcher scissors that we have like in our kitchen or something like that.
Right.
And then when she's trying to get stuff with the broom, she'll like scoop it right next to like a giant vase that we have with like flowers in it that she could break the glass and get hurt. So it's like, yeah, she's being independent and that's kind of a good thing, but at the same time, she doesn't have an awareness of like danger and risk. So we prefer that she ask us for those things, but she's not really able to advocate for when she needs help or assistance. And this is something that has kind of crossed into school as well. So self advocacy looks different for verbal versus nonverbal communication. For her, when she was nonverbal, because there was a period of several years where she was nonverbal, her self advocacy was basically just completely non existent. I think now it's like a little bit existent, but it's still not really there. And what she would do is basically just gesture frantically, or she would start whining, like making vocalizations to kind of like get your attention, but it was like more out of frustration. It wasn't really intentional. And so that's how we knew that she needed help, but she wasn't intentionally seeking the help. We just could read her cues. And now that she's verbal, you would think that that would translate into her being able to ask for help, but it hasn't really. Like, even though she's verbal, she still doesn't like think to ask for help or really advocate for anything. And one incident that crosses my mind that happened fairly recently was, for instance, she ran into like a school bullying situation at the playground at school. And the staff did great when we brought this up to them. They really nipped it in the bud. I was really impressed. It was really, really great response. But I was kind of, alarmed by her reaction to it. Like, she was being bullied and we didn't really know what was going on other than the fact that she started to behave differently at home. So she was becoming more aggressive with her older sister. She was starting to like kick her or get really hypersensitive for really small things where she would react really aggressively. And we got onto that. We're like, okay, this is weird behavior for her. But she at no point in time was able to tell us or communicate that anything was wrong until she randomly, out of the blue, at the end of the day when we were putting her to bed and tucking her in, she randomly mentioned like the name of the bully. And we were like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And that's when I was able to go to her. And what I was able to do is get her to communicate through art. So instead of having her explain to me how she was feeling or tell me the story of what happened, I just decided to kind of discreetly on the side, I was like, you know what, let's just color. Let's color before bedtime. And so I brought out some paper and I brought out some crayons, colored pencils, and I basically just asked her like to draw her day for me. And I was like, oh, and who was there? You mentioned your bully, like, can you draw a picture of him? And then I was like, draw a picture of you. Oh, who else was there? Draw it. And she ended up drawing a picture of him taking her friend's hand and like pushing her in that picture. And then she labeled all the friends and everything like that. And then once she had that, I asked her, okay, can you write down a few words of what's happening here and how it makes you feel. And she was able to write it out in words. So what I noticed and realized is she can't really pull these thoughts cohesively verbally, but she can sit down and draw and she can express things prompted. So we had to kind of restructure how we address her self-advocacy and realize that art is really helpful for her.
You raise a good point because I mean, sometimes we just, or I mean, maybe me, I'm not sure, I can't speak for you. I kind of like assume because we kind of were starting off with the conversation with her where I was like, oh, okay, like what happened? Like, tell me what happened. And she was just able to like kind of like repeat the same bully's like name and then just say like he's mean or something, but not like beyond just like, okay, there's like a mean kid at school. Like, I mean, there's only so much you can do with like mean kids at school. But then, yeah, by changing like the platform or the medium in expressing herself, she was able to give you like this whole long list of like what actually happens on the playground. And I mean, that's great. I mean, I think of it kind of similar to like almost like what, like play therapy, essentially. Like it's almost like you're tricking your mind essentially into like kind of like relaxing, and then you're able to like recall information more easily, essentially.
It's low pressure. Like it's a low
Right.
pressure situation. You don't feel the pressure to like
Right. So there's not like the
explain.
stress, right, of
Yeah.
trying to figure out like everything or how to express it. And we've struggled with that because she's always struggled as far as being able to like express herself just through words alone. So I mean, this was definitely helpful, a like new way for her to kind of express herself through drawing. So I mean, that is definitely something that we want to kind of keep in our tool bag of whenever we need, we can kind of have her express through drawing and hopefully be able to kind of bridge the gap in communication for our understanding, kind of get it a little bit better.
Yeah. And another thing that we learned from that incident was that she is not great at asking for help in those situations in real time and in real life. So, like, when she was going through that situation on the playground, she at no point in time thought, like, oh, I should go to my teacher and ask for help, or I should go to another kid that I trust and ask for their help. She at no point in time process that like I need to go to someone for support if I cannot defend myself. So she basically what I was able to get from her was she basically just kind of sulked there after the incident happened and kind of just like cried to herself. And I'm like, ugh, that broke my heart in the sense that I'm like, I don't know how to give you the skills of being able to understand that when, you know, when it comes to autism, really understanding social cues and abstract language is really a challenge. So I basically just decided, you know, it might just be easier to put in some sort of like IEP goal where we can address this through some sort of self-advocacy skills with like more rigid guidelines to kind of prompt her and give her the words, give her the actions so that she then has a set of rules and guidelines to go by. And so we're using that as like a starting point now to try to practice with her, along with, of course, working with the teachers and everything, which again, they were really, really responsive. It was great. But the one issue with this is even though we do have an IEP and we have the ability to add this sort of resource to the IEP and we have a great team working with us, this is something that to me feels like potentially a lifelong issue. And how do you work on it beyond school age? Like, how do you work on it throughout life? And I know, like, I've mentioned this previously in other episodes, how my own like family has noted that I struggle with self-advocacy and I don't even notice it because I just don't think to or process to advocate for myself on certain things. I'm a great advocate for other people, but not for myself. And so that also makes me think like it's going to be a challenge to be able to get them skills that I myself have not really perfected for myself. But it's definitely something that we are proactively going to be working on because at the end of the day, like one day Matt and I aren't going to be here and like we have to prepare them as best as possible because we won't always be there to help them.
Yeah, that's true. I was going to joke around and say like, I'm bullying you, but then I realized like, I was like, no, that's like,
It's the other way around.
well, that too. But then I was like, that doesn't come off right. So, and I was like, no, definitely has to be the 4'11" female. Yeah, I mean, you're a little what's the word, spitfire, like little like,
Yeah. Yeah. I'm Latina. I think I
yeah,
count as like a
you're
full grown man.
well, you're like little dog syndrome. But but that's the thing. Anyway, no, I think you're exactly right. So unless we basically almost like role play or have like social stories that kind of like get her to think more about different circumstances and then how to apply that, it is definitely a situation because like you're right, we can't come up with every possible scenario that she might encounter during her day. It could be bullying in a different way. Like if we were to say like, oh, a bully like trying to steal your lunch money. So like this bully didn't steal lunch money, so she might not be able to draw the like parallel. Basically, be like, even though he didn't steal my lunch money, he is still a bully. Therefore, I will still apply the same structure. Go talk to an adult and tell them what's happening. So, I mean, I think maybe we can try and do like more role playing or try and do more art to try and catch some of these situations earlier before they start to, I
Yeah.
was going to say blossom into something, but that's not a
Well,
good.
and but that is why it's so important that when we look at autism advocacy, we look at it from a two-pronged approach. So we're looking at building our kids' self-advocacy skills to the best of their ability and to the best of our ability, but at the same time, we also have to approach it from looking at our environment and trying to see like, okay, well, what can we fix in our environment? What can we do with the environment that they're going to be in to make it more amenable to them? So, an example of that would be like going into your community and trying to teach your community about the struggles of autistic individuals and advocating for them that way and saying like, hey, these kiddos have a hard time discerning between when they're being bullied or when they're not. They might have difficulties communicating. They might have difficulties self-advocating. So if we're able to bring more awareness to the community, that community is raising the kids that are going to school with our kids. So hopefully the more parents that we tell out there in the real world in our local community, the more children will be impacted by those parents hearing those stories, which could eventually trickle down to, the kids in your kids' classroom. So I just feel like it's kind of like a two-pronged approach where, yeah, we definitely want to work on our kids' abilities and, we're doing all the therapies, we're doing everything that we can. But at the end of the day, I think it's also the responsibility of the community to be like kind people and like learn to tell your children like, even if you don't have a child with a disability, make sure you're talking to your kid who's going to school and asking them like, what's up, like, are you making sure that you're being like a kind, considerate person, or is your kid the one who is ending up essentially bullying other kids? And I know that that's easier said than done because oftentimes the kids who are doing the bullying are coming from broken homes. And that's a whole other issue that you have to kind of address. But at the end of the day, I think it's both an internal issue that, we have to contend with as autistic individuals and family, but also part of the community responsibility.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, at least the effort to bring awareness to the community so I mean, it might fall on some people like deaf ears where they're not going to change how they parent. They're not going to be nice to various individuals for whatever the reason is. I mean, there's people out there that aren't great people. But if you're able to convince or break through to one, two, five people, at least that slowly starts to grow because then that kind of changes the influence of those individuals to potentially be outward towards others. So then it kind of spreads that way. Um, I definitely think, as far as working with trying to find the line between how much independence is good versus how to reach out is going to kind of be kind of, I think, like, what is it, a seesaw? Is that the right thing? Like, kind of like the
Balancing?
yeah, like
I
where it kind
don't
of goes
know.
back and forth. Yeah. Because like obviously we don't want so much independence that she's doing things that like are well
Or
above her age
dangerous.
and dangerous, right?
Yeah.
But then at the same time, like we don't want it to turn into another bullying situation, or I mean, there's so many other various situations that she could find herself in. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's definitely an ongoing challenge, and we're still trying to figure out that approach.
Yeah. And so, like we mentioned, both of our kids really struggle with this, but they struggle with it in different ways. So, all of that was really how our middle child struggles with it. Our oldest child struggles with it a little bit differently. She is more like the type that kind of closes in and keeps her emotions to herself and then kind of gets explosive and has a meltdown when she basically can't handle it anymore. And for her, what we've noticed is that she has a lot of anxiety and fear of rejection. She's got a lot of like fear of being misunderstood. She has fear of being ignored by her peers. She has a fear of social rejection or any sort of like negative responses or perceived to be negative responses from peers and adults. Even if they're not actually negative, she might misperceive it or is highly sensitive to that. And because of that issue where she's really having that anxiety and the lack of understanding, it makes it hard for her to self advocate. It's another barrier because she goes straight to kind of the fight or flight. So that's another challenge that we have when it comes to autism is just being able to get to the point where you can even be aware enough to advocate for yourself. And that's another issue is like that self-awareness piece. A lot of people who are autistic have a difficulty recognizing and naming their own emotions and their own needs. So that's in addition to feeling overwhelming feelings, you can also have the polar opposite of that where maybe you're feeling something, but you don't quite know what it is. And because of that, you can't really tackle it. So that's another challenge when it comes to autism and self advocacy. And what we've done with that is we're really working with their play therapists who specialize in play, which is a type of specialized autism play therapy. And they're really working hard to help our kids identify those emotions, try to identify like what do those feelings feel like in your body, what appropriate situations those feelings may come up with, and kind of how to handle them or what you can do to release those emotions. So for us, play therapy has really been where we've been focusing a lot of those efforts, as well as trying to make those accommodations in the IEP at school.
Yeah, play therapy has, I mean, definitely been a game changer. I mean, it's still an ongoing challenge as far as the advocacy because it is very different from the middle child. So, I mean, like everything will kind of be proceeding as normal, good day, everything. And then it seems like something's off, but we don't know what triggered or what's the reason for it. And so it'll kind of turn into a potential meltdown or her acting out or various things. And then we're trying to figure out, like, okay, what is the situation? So, I mean, and it's nothing serious. I mean, like, I found out today we had a similar struggle with her acting out, not listening, kind of throwing herself on the ground and everything. But then I found out as I was driving home, she fell asleep in the car. So I'm like, okay, chances are she's probably overtired because this kid never seems to be tired or fall asleep anywhere. She usually stays up late in her bed and then she never naps or anything. So the fact that she was falling asleep in the car for like a half hour drive, that kind of stood out as kind of out of the ordinary. So kind of overtired, but she's not able to express like, oh, I'm feeling really tired. And that's why I'm kind of struggling because I don't feel like my normal self. I don't feel like doing this. I just kind of want to sit down and just rest. Cause obviously, I mean, if she would have mentioned that to us, then we can kind of help her better. We can assist,
Yeah.
but then we don't find out until it actually happens. So, I mean, that's kind of an ongoing challenge on her part that we're trying to figure out how to have her speak her feelings a little bit better or try and convey that message better.
Yeah, and a lot of this is also just normal and typical of kids in general and part of that child development phase. So there is a lot of like overlap with that. I think the difference is that autistic kids struggle more with being able to identify that as like what they're actually struggling with, and also they might have an exaggerated reaction. So like they might have a much stronger reaction to whatever it is they're dealing with than a neurotypical peer would. So one of the things that we're doing is again helping them identify and label those feelings to really help them process that. And so for them, they're really receptive to doing that through art. Like I mentioned, they love coloring. We got them like a 24 pack of like erasable color pencils, which has been great because if your child is anything like ours and a very perfectionist, the erasable color pencils is really important because mistakes can lead to meltdowns. So just a side tip, get erasable colored pencils. But that's part of what we've been doing. And we've also been working on teaching that emotional regulation piece as a foundation for advocacy. Because if you don't have the emotional regulation, you can't really get to the point of advocacy. You first have to build off of just being able to regulate. So that's something that we're starting at. They're kind of at an age now, they're going to be 6 and 7 soon, where that's really going to be more important, more critical as they get older. So that's what we've been focusing on. And then when it comes to like communication, a lot of times, depending on the communication level of your child, communication tools can fall short. So AAC has certain limitations, like you cannot be very expressive with that. Although with the Koji app, when the AI coming in, maybe they will be able to, I should get Koji to sponsor me with that as much as we mention them. um, but that one really gives you more flexibility with that communication. So I'm hopeful that in the future with AI, that's not going to be as much of a problem on AAC devices. But right now it is. And so that can also lead to that frustration and inability to self-advocate, even for those kids who are nonverbal and, fluent at using their AAC devices. Like they might still struggle with that because of that reason. Same with visual supports and visual aids. Like you're limited to what is on that aid. You're limited to what is on that visual support. So that's something to keep in consideration, is that if your kid is still showing like frustration and stuff, it might just be that, they don't have the tool in front of them to express exactly how they feel or what it is that they need. So that's where we kind of have to get creative and observant as parents.
Well, even, I mean, I was just thinking, because like our oldest, I mean, she's got a very expansive vocabulary, able to, I would say, express herself very well. I mean, being able to recognize her emotions are a little harder for her. But again, with being able to draw, color, all that, like it's very, very difficult for her to say, like, I'm sorry and apologize to someone. But she feels much more comfortable, like writing a card, drawing hearts, and basically writing, like, I'm sorry, whoever, for whatever the incident it might be. And I accept that as valid as her apologizing for it, because I realize, like, okay, it is a challenge and a struggle for that communication because of whatever it is, guilt or whatever, to say the words, I'm sorry for doing whatever. But if she's able to express it through drawing and saying, writing a card saying, I am sorry, Dad, for example, I mean, that's communication as far as I'm concerned. I mean, actually, she probably went through more effort in writing the card saying that than just saying, I'm sorry. But like, I mean, I think it's important to try and seek out additional ways to try and get communication, even if you think that your kids are able to understand and communicate fine back to you, at least trying to seek a different way to try and get more information or more insight into what they're feeling, or just kind of their, I don't know, internal dialogue, if you will.
Yeah, if they have one, because I don't. um,
That's okay.
But yeah, you mentioned something earlier too that I think is a good point, and that's kind of the idea of like knowing when to step in and when to kind of let them figure it out. Because our ultimate goal as parents, any parents, whether your kid's autistic or not, is to help create basically to help your child become as independent as possible, to prepare them for when you're not going to be here anymore. And so being able to figure out, when do I put like the bumper rails? When do I step in versus when am I overstepping, or when am I creating dependency, is like an important line to try to determine. For us, we kind of tread carefully around that, because we do like to basically push the envelope as close as we can without causing any sort of issue. And as soon as we see like, okay, that was too much, we pull back in and try to figure out, okay, what supports can we add to try to get them across that finish line. And the goal is to eventually reduce the amount of supports needed to accomplish the goal. And if they always need supports, like that's fine too, as long as we at least try, because we want to make sure that we're not we basically want to make sure that we're not limiting them unnecessarily. So like, I don't want to hinder the progress because I felt overly protective and didn't think they could do something, but then we test the waters out and it turns out they can. So we're always trying to cautiously step in, but also push for that self-advocacy. So like, for example, with the bullying situation, my mama instinct is to go in there, walk into that school and be like, who is this kid? I'm calling up their parents. I'm handling this myself.
Line them up.
Yeah. Yeah. Like that's like what my mama bear instinct wants to do. Right. But I know that that's not going to help. And I know that that's not going to teach my kid the skills that she needs, because the problem is she was not able to advocate for herself. She was not able to ask for help. She didn't go to the teacher, nothing. She just kind of suffers in silence. And that's going to be a problem that can have lifelong consequences. So I see moments like this as an opportunity for growth instead. And I'm like, okay, let's take this as an opportunity to do a practice run for what she'll need in real life when she's older and hopefully more independent. And what we do is we use the IEP, or we use the school, or if it's outside of the school, whatever structure you're in, whether that's in your family or whatever it may be, to set up kind of like a sandbox, a like practice zone to try to test out different things and see what works and doesn't work to help her become more independent ultimately. So for us, that was creating some visual aids to kind of guide her through these conversations and prompts. It was also reminding her, like, hey, when you're here, remember, come to the teacher when you need help, things like that, just like verbal prompts and reminders. But it's really independent to your child's needs. But for us, it's just important that we don't stop our kids' growth. Like, we want to make sure that we're continuously trying to at least give them the opportunity for growth, even if they can't necessarily take that opportunity.
Well, the other thing that I mean, I didn't think about until you started mentioning it is it's good because in a way, it did teach her a little bit more independence. I'm not sure if she'll perceive it that way or if it's just me analyzing it. Like, she was able to kind of mention it to like mom and dad that she was struggling at school, but then it wasn't us who was resolving the problem. It was her teachers who were resolving it. So I'm hoping that she's able to realize, like, throughout life, mom and dad are not the only ones to solve problems that I might have. I'm able to go to a teacher, a counselor, a police officer. Like, I'm able to go to multiple people in these trusted positions to try and get help if I need it. So I mean, I'm not sure, granted, because she's
She
fine.
doesn't even come to us
I'm
yet.
not, yeah, I'm not sure she's at that point, but
Yeah.
eventually, hopefully we can get to the point where it's not mom and dad are the only ones that can solve my problem, because obviously mom and dad aren't going to be here forever.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, our focus is to create a safe environment where we can encourage open communication at home, whether that's verbally or like through coloring, just giving her some sort of outlet to communicate how she's feeling with us, and normalize asking for help. So Matt and I can like role play at home asking each other for help in front of our kids so that they see, like, hey, mom and dad asked for help. It's okay. So they're more likely to feel comfortable to ask for help themselves. And also teaching them simple scripts. So giving her the language that she needs to advocate. So I need help, or raising her hand, or whatever it may be. I don't like this. That's another thing that we have to teach her. She also feels compelled to eat anything that we give her, even if she doesn't like it. And she doesn't understand that it's an option to say, I don't like this. We're all about trying it, and I want them to try it because their diet is so limited, but we're not going to force them to eat something they don't like. And she doesn't understand quite yet that, like, you can say, I don't like it. She says everything is delicious no matter what it is.
It's so funny. She'll eat something. We're like, oh, do you like it? It's my favorite.
It's my favorite. I love it.
I love
it's my
it.
favorite.
She hates
Yeah.
it. And we're like, you don't have to eat it, sweetie. You can say it's not, or that you don't like it. I don't
Yeah.
like it.
Yeah. And what I learned with her is that she doesn't like to say, I don't like. I think that she finds it off putting for some reason, like she's hurting someone's feelings. So what we've taught her to say is, oh, you can say it's not my favorite. And because it's more passive, she seems to be more comfortable with saying it's not my favorite. And that has worked a lot better than saying I don't like it. I don't know. That's just like a specific to her thing, but that's worked for us. So yeah, doing the role play, modeling the advocacy to show our kids like how to speak up for themselves in real life situation, and, you know, letting us advocate for ourselves in front of them so that they can see how it works essentially in real life. And of course, what we do is encourage and reinforce it when they do it. So if we see that they do show some self-advocacy, like maybe they're fighting at home and the middle one is like, I don't like that, to the older one, I'd be like, oh, good job. I'm so proud of you for like expressing that you don't like that. That's a good step forward. And then we kind of help mediate that conversation between the two of them. So that's something that we've been working on and we have seen some progress in, but it's still like a long journey for us because both of our kids are still struggling with this. And honestly, I, as an adult, struggle with it. So I feel like this is going to be a lifelong thing.
Yeah, not to mention if one advocates and the other kind of retaliates. So then we have to be like right there ready to like jump in to like break up a potential fight. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
fun.
for sure. So yeah, Just a reminder that, self advocacy is a process, not a destination. It's just, learn as much as you can on your way. And there's no ultimate end goal other than just getting better than where you were before. So that's what we always say, like, compare your child to where they were before. Don't compare it to other people. And that to me is success in itself. With that said, I want to ask you guys, what strategies have worked for you when helping your child advocate for themselves, or what do they struggle the most with? What are the biggest challenges that you've faced in teaching your kids self advocacy? And how do you balance stepping in to help your child advocate versus encouraging independence? Does like your mama bear, papa bear always come out? Or do you kind of let them have some space and try to figure it out for themselves sometimes? Leave your answers in the comments on our YouTube or Facebook at Autism Wish. And don't forget to become a member by joining our Patreon. It's patreon.com/autismwish to unlock member-only perks like our fast-track access to our monthly Embracing Autism grant and also additional entries to that random selection. With that said, I will see y'all next time.
All right. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.